The statues at Court Pietrangeli are not merely decorative, they are sentinels. For nearly 100 years their marble faces, carved to honor champions from Italy, from Europe, from South America, have gazed down upon a stage where tennis tells its deepest stories. They have watched every nation the sport has ever produced battle across the red clay of the Foro Italico. Every nation, that is, except one. Until 4 days ago, not a single Filipino had ever been part of that story. The stone sentinels had never seen that flag. They had never heard that language rise from the stands. And then, on a Wednesday in May, a 20-year-old woman walked onto their court and changed the narrative of an entire century. Her name is Alex Eala, and she carries more than a racket. She carries a flag that had never been planted on this clay before. There's a thing she once said about herself before the lights got this bright. I don't have a lot of experience, that's for sure, but I do have experience with compartmentalizing. I have no hesitation to leave that part of me behind when I step on court. That ability to separate, to seal away pressure, history, and expectation in a mental box until the match is over is not a small thing. It is, perhaps, her superpower. Because on Wednesday, May 6, 2026, Alex Eala walked onto the historic grounds of the Foro Italico and did what no Filipino man or woman had ever done in the Open era. She won a main draw match at the Italian Open. And she did not stop there. Just 48 hours later, she returned and did it again. Ranked number 42 in the world at only 20 years old, she arrived in Rome with a record that told a simple, almost painful story. 0 main draw wins at this tournament, and 0 Filipino appearances in its Open-era history. The tennis media, in its cold, algorithmic way, had already labeled her side of the bracket a nightmare draw. She was the lowest-ranked player on her side with any realistic path through it. That headline existed as recently as the Sunday before she struck her first ball. By Thursday, it was already garbage. The Italian Open has been running since 1930. Thousands of players, tens of thousands of matches, and in all that time the main draw had never once featured a Filipino player, not as an act of malice but as a quiet, brutal reflection of how tennis opportunity has been distributed across the globe for over a century. The sport grew deep roots in Europe, expanded through South America and the United States, then into Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, Southeast Asia, particularly the Philippines, remained on the outside, waiting at a door that never opened. Alex Eala didn't arrive to knock politely, she arrived to kick it down. Her first-round opponent was Magdalena Frech of Poland, ranked number 45 in the world, experienced on clay and already established in the draw. The pre-match framing was cautious, almost clinical. Eala is promising, but this is a tough ask. The result, however, was not. The first set was a statement, 6-0, a clean dismissal so dominant it felt almost out of place for an underdog with a nightmare assignment. Frech, to her credit, stabilized and took the second set 6-3. This is where some players dissolve. The scoreboard flips, the psychological weight shifts, and the comeback narrative feels heavier than the tennis itself. But Eala did not break. She played a third set and closed it 6-4. The final line 6-0-3-6-6-4 tells you exactly what kind of player she is becoming. She dominates, she absorbs, she closes. That match made her the first Filipino in the Open era to win a main draw match at the Italian Open. WTA.com recorded it in plain, official language without embellishment. Alexandra Eala became the first player from the Philippines to appear in the Internazionale BNL d'Italia main draw in the Open era. That isn't projection, that is the record. Then came Friday, May 8th, and the level shifted into an entirely different conversation. Wang Xinyu walked onto court Pietrangeli ranked number 31 in the world, already seated in the draw, and carrying a recent psychological edge over Eala, having beaten her earlier in 2026 in Auckland, making the head-to-head 1-0 in Wang's favor. That matters when two players meet again under pressure on a court where history feels like it's pressing down from every marble angle. Eala fell behind 0-3 in the first set. Put yourself in that moment. You've already made history once this week. You're on a marble line show court in Rome. The same player who beat you months ago is ahead again, and everything you've built is at risk of becoming a footnote. Then something changed. She won 6 of the next 7 games. Final score 6-4, 6-3. In 1 hour and 26 minutes, she leveled the head-to-head at 1-1. Eliminated the number 31 seed, and became the first Filipino of any gender to reach the round of 32 at the Italian Open. Her ranking moved in real time from number 44 to a career-high number 42. The crowd inside Pietrangeli was never neutral. Filipino fans had flown in from London, Germany, and Malta, booking flights, crossing time zones not for a tournament but for a player. And when the match ended, what echoed around Pietrangeli wasn't the usual polite applause. It was *Laban Alex*, a Filipino word for fight, shouted from the stands of one of Europe's oldest tennis venues by people who had come thousands of miles to be there. GMA News called it the Alex Eala effect. igniting pride in Italy. Respected Philippine sports broadcaster Diane Castiglio documented flags rising against the marble statues, while Italian spectators reportedly joined the energy, chanting *Forza Alex alongside Laban Alex*. That kind of atmosphere isn't manufactured. You don't schedule it, you don't script it. It happens when a moment becomes bigger than the match itself. And then, between those two victories, something unexpected happened. She went for a walk. Eala toured Rome the way players sometimes do between rounds, trying to step away from the pressure for just a few hours. She found herself near the Vatican, moving through streets layered with history until she passed a building she didn't immediately recognize. She told the Associated Press exactly what happened next. "I was like, okay, we really are everywhere." And then I later learned that that's the embassy of the Philippines to the Vatican. And funny story, my great-grandmother used to work there way back when, so it was full circle or something sentimental. Let that land. Her great-grandmother once worked inside a Filipino diplomatic building in Rome, the same city where generations later her granddaughter is now making history at the Italian Open. Eala did not plan this narrative. She stumbled into it on a simple sightseeing walk. That connection between her family's past in Rome and her present in Rome is not a metaphor crafted for broadcast. It is literal. It happened. And it adds a layer of weight to everything she has achieved this week that goes far beyond rankings or results. The wall of history didn't just crack, it cracked in a place her family had already once stood. The WTA rarely writes in the language of symbolism. It is a careful institution, precise with records and strict with milestones. That is why the official wording published on May 8, 2026 carries such institutional weight. Alexandra Eala, the first player from the Philippines to appear in the Internazionale BNL d'Italia main draw in the Open era, and now potentially the first Filipino man or woman in the Open era to reach the round of 16 in Rome. That is not interpretation. That is the WTA's record-keeping voice, the same system that verifies Grand Slam champions, tracks career earnings, and preserves every defining statistic in professional tennis history. And in that record, what Eala is doing in Rome has never been done before. Billie Jean King has spent decades advancing a clear thesis about women's tennis, that the sport only reaches its full potential when its draw reflects the true geographic breadth of the world. She has made this argument in boardrooms and interviews, and across every public platform available to her, not as symbolism but as structure. Representation, in her view, is not a courtesy. It is part of the sport's competitive and commercial foundation. While there is no verified public statement from King specifically addressing this week's Rome run at the time of writing, the broader idea she has championed is exactly what Eala's breakthrough represents in practice. A Filipino player breaking through a century-old ceiling at one of the sport's most established events is not a side note. It is the argument made real on red clay in 2026. Now she moves into an even higher tier of challenge. World number 2, Elena Rybakina. The data around Rybakina at this level is imposing. 24 wins and just 2 losses in completed WTA 1000 matches. When she wins the first set, she has 12 consecutive opening round victories at WTA 1000 events, a Wimbledon title in 2022, a Rome championship already on her resume. On paper, this is where the story is expected to end. But there is a small crack in the pattern. Rybakina is 1-3 in third-round matches at Rome across her career, and that matters because it is exactly the stage Eala is stepping into now. The round where historically even the world number 2 has shown unexpected vulnerability at this tournament. That is not hopeful interpretation or fan framing. It is simply what the record shows, WTA.com's own statistical record. A win today would mean something the record book has never recorded before: the first Filipino player, man or woman, to reach the round of 16 in Rome. It would also make Eala only the second woman representing an Asian country to defeat a top 5 opponent at this event, joining, in a twist of symmetry, Elena Rybakina herself, who achieved it while representing Kazakhstan. Beyond this week, the calendar begins to tighten. Roland Garros starts May 24th. Iga Swiatek arrives in Paris with the best clay court form of her career, a career-high ranking and momentum built from 2 consecutive rounds at a WTA 1000 event on the surface. But Eala has already admitted to the Associated Press with striking honesty, "I haven't been past the second round in a Grand Slam, so that would be nice." The understatement says more than it hides. It reflects someone who understands exactly what is still ahead. After Roland Garros, Wimbledon follows, the tournament she grew up admiring most, defined in her own words by tradition, elegance, and the grass itself. She will arrive at the All England Club this summer as something she has never been before, a player the draw must actively account for, not overlook. Even the ecosystem around her is beginning to respond. The Manila WTA 125 event that emerged in January 2026, fueled in large part by her rising profile, is an early signal that the WTA understands the commercial equation forming here. Filipino fans traveling from London, Germany, and Malta to watch a quarterfinal in Rome is not just loyalty to sport, it is loyalty to player. And that kind of loyalty changes more than atmosphere. It changes attendance curves, broadcasting interest, sponsorship logic, and the long-term demographic reach tennis has been trying to build across Southeast Asia for years. Earlier this year in Auckland, Wang Xinyu beat Alex Eala in the semifinal. That result ended what had been a promising start to 2026 and reinforced a ceiling that had quietly followed her through the early part of her professional rise. The sense that in the biggest moments against higher-seeded opponents, the decisive points were still just out of reach. She did not answer that loss with statements. She answered it with her game 4 months later, on one of Rome's most visible show courts. The match began in a familiar pattern, Eala falling behind 0-3 in the first set, replaying the same early pressure that had undone her in Auckland. For a moment it looked like the script might hold, but this time it didn't. Eala fought her way back into control, flipping momentum point by point, refusing to let the early gap define the outcome. It was not a sudden shift, it was accumulation, patience, pressure sustained long enough to break the pattern. She has also been candid about the ceiling she has yet to break at the Grand Slam level. In her own words to the Associated Press on May 8th, "I haven't been past the second round in a Grand Slam, so that would be nice." There is no bravado in that sentence, only clarity. A player aware that WTA 1000 breakthroughs matter, but that the sport's final measure still lives inside the slams. What she has done in Rome does not erase that ceiling, but it moves it, lowering it from something distant and abstract into something visibly within reach. She is closer to it now than she has ever been. The marble statues on court Pietrangeli witnessed something this week that their creators could not have imagined when they were carved. A Filipino woman ranked number 42 who had fallen 0-3 in a key set, who between rounds discovered her great-grandmother's footsteps at a Vatican embassy, then stepped back onto court and continued to rewrite what Philippine tennis looks like on this stage. The fans who flew in from London, Germany, and Malta, who filled the stands and taught Romans the word Laban asterisk, recognized what was happening before any ranking algorithm adjusted to it. They recognized it before the nightmare draw headlines were rewritten by results. In their eyes, the story had already changed. And the WTA record book is now doing what it always does, catching up to what has already happened on court. The century-long wall at the Italian Open did not fall quietly. It fell with chants in 2 languages, with flags above marble statues. And with a scoreline that reshaped Philippine tennis history twice in 48 hours. A family connection stretching back generations. A crowd that traveled across continents. A player turning early deficits into a different outcome entirely. Now there is a world number 2 standing between Eala and the round of 16. But the question is no longer abstract. It is immediate. Does Alex Eala beat Elena Rybakina today and become the first Filipino in history to reach the round of 16 in Rome? Or does Rybakina, with all her records, all her efficiency at this level, and all her experience in WTA 1000 pressure moments, assert exactly why she has owned this stage for years? The door is there. The match decides what happens next. So here is the only question that matters now. Do you think Eala pulls off another upset, or does Rybakina's experience at this level take over? Drop your prediction. Because every time Eala steps onto a court that has never seen her country's name before, this is where the full story gets told. The records, the history, and the moments that never make the highlight reels but define a career. When Roland Garros begins on May 24th, the next chapter will be just 2 weeks away. And based on what we've just witnessed in Rome, it is already shaping up to be something worth watching until the very last point.